Hi everyone, Matt Bernier, Dan Illman, taking a look at the closing day feature down at Keeneland. It was the Fayette Stakes. Not a big field, but they're going 1.1 miles on the main track, and unfortunately, it was over a sloppy track. They break from the gate. You're going to notice Neolithic. We know Neolithic's game. Neolithic is a horse that likes to be forwardly placed. He set the pace in the Woodward, which eventually was won by soon-to-be Breeders' Cup Classic favorite Gunrunner. He goes out to the front here, and it looks like everything is going all fine and dandy.
Stunned he wasn't the favorite in this race. I think you and I disagree a little bit, considering the gaudy company lines, the Gunrunners, the Pegasus World Cup, the Dubai World Cup, where he was far from embarrassed each and every time. Here's the drop. He's the lone speed. He's not the favorite in the race, and Calvin Burrell won't let him get away while he's aboard the Player.
The Player sits just off. You're going to see the fractions go up 24 and 1, 47 and 2 for a half mile. Again, if Neolithic is what people have made him out to be, there's no excuse.
No excuse at all. Too clear. Maybe the wet track's a slight excuse, but boy, you're clear over a horse like the Player, who is not supposed to want this 1.1 miles. Neolithic is, and this is a disappointing loss for Neolithic.
Meanwhile, farther back, down on the inside, you're going to see McCracken start to get involved. We saw him dance in the Kentucky Derby and some of the other big 3-year-old races. You have Giuseppe the Great back there, another 3-year-old. Probably the biggest disappointment of the race was Honorable Duty, but you had brought up maybe it's the wet track.
I don't think he likes a wet track. You see him try to get into this race right now with a little bit of a 3-wide bid, and the speeds just pull away. And it's notable that nothing is coming from the back of the pack. They're all off the bridle. It's a 2-horse race from the 5/16 pole to the wire, and the question was, could the Player dig down deep and gut out this 1.1 miles? Because it's the first time he's gone this distance, and it was a big question mark.
Not only did he gut it out, he actually relished it. He comes home in 12 and 3. He's going to take over right now from Neolithic. Neolithic kind of gives it up without any sort of real challenge, and he's well clear of third, so there's no issue there. You know you're going to hit the exacta, but the Player's going to go on for Calvin Burrell and get the job done.
Really like the way he reaches out for ground, his head low to the ground. He really wants to beat you. He's no superstar, but he's a real professional, solid horse, and he got the 1.1 miles, and this opens up things for Buff Bradley now. You could obviously go to the Clark at Churchill Downs. You could even cut him back for the Cigar Mile if you want. $19.60 for the Player.
Neolithic rounds out your exacta, pays $3.80 to place. The $1 exacta comes back $33. 50-cent try if you have McCracken underneath, $57.30. You brought it up, the Player. This was really one of the first times he had been allowed to go a longer distance. Not the first time he'd been allowed to go 2 turns, but most of his races had been kept to 1 turn, a mile, something in that area. Do you think it was him really relishing the distance, or do you think, keep in mind, this is also one of the first times he'd ever faced a wet track. Do you think he just loved that as well?
I think he really appreciated the wet track. I think he really appreciated that there was not a lot of running going on behind him. To me, even though he has the graded win at 9 furlongs, to me the jury's still out as to whether it's going to be his best distance. But this is a horse that we always thought had a lot of potential. Last year, we liked him a little bit in the Indiana Derby against Cupid going 1 1/16, and he made a then sharp Cupid really work. Unfortunately, that race preceded a long layoff. He must have had some sort of physical issue, but this is a really solid, consistent horse.
97 buyer for the Player for Buff Bradley, Calvin Burrell. Good to see Calvin back in the winner's circle in a graded stakes race. Neolithic now. Neolithic got a 93 buyer. I'm going to kind of give you a statement and tell me if you think that it's crazy. I don't think he wants to go this far.
It's not crazy.
I think ultimately, if you turn him back for a race like the Cigar, I think he could be a legitimate player.
And I wonder if that's going to be the plan for Todd Pletcher. Seeing what happened in the Bold Ruler, seeing that Tom's Ready, who's a really nice horse, might have taken advantage of a big pace. Maybe this is a horse that can control the race in the Cigar Mile, a la a Private Zone from a couple of years back. We know he has the ability to run with top horses. He himself is probably not a top horse, but there's no reason why in a Cigar Mile that is still sort of on the fence, many horses even pointing for the race, he can have a major pace edge in that race. I wouldn't give up on him just yet, but I have to admit, since he's come back from Dubai, I know he won that one race at Saratoga, I don't love what I see.
The 4 remaining horses, 2 of them, all due respect, are a little bit overmatched. Giuseppe the Great, Malibu Pro. Honorable Duty, simply say it's a wet track, draw a line through it and move on?
I'd like to. I wish he did a little bit more, but it's possible that he just hates a wet track. And I think when we did the preview, we noticed that his last 3 fast dirt races resulted in triple-digit buyers, and the wet track race, not so much. I'm willing to give him the wet track excuse. I don't think he's much more of a horse than this, but if he shows up in the Clark at a big price, he's a horse maybe can round out the exotics.
What do you do if you're Ian Wilkes with McCracken? Because right now, this is just a slow horse.
You know what you would do.
Well, I got to be honest. I needed to see more than this. I initially had thought you run in a race like the Cigar Mile because I think he's a one-turn kind of horse. Do you completely regroup and say Malibu?
No. I think that if you stuck with McCracken this long, this is not the race to say, I'm done with him, because he had the sloppy track excuse, and it was a race that was dominated up front. You saw Brian Hernandez try to get McCracken into the race on the backstretch because he felt this pace was not overly strong, and he didn't want to be left with too much to do. And I think McCracken was nearest the inside, getting a lot of mud kicked back in his face at a distance that you thought might be a little bit too far. I don't think this is the race, but we're getting there. I think he's got to start showing something, because ever since that little injury before the Tampa Bay Derby, where he would have been a big, big favorite, he's run the Haskell. But that's really the only race he's run that's been representative of the pre-Tampa Bay Derby, pre-little injury McCracken. I agree with you, he needs to turn back in distance. This isn't the race to give up on him.
Even as far as knowing that maybe he didn't love the situation that he had presented on Saturday, did you get enough out of it to go to a race like the Cigar?
I think I think now it's up to Wilkes that if he didn't feel like he got enough out of it. I think he did, probably because it was a tiring, sloppy track, and he probably got a lot of fitness out of this race. I'm assuming he came back to the barn blowing and tired, and now it's up to Wilkes to train him, and I think we'll see by the workouts. I mean, is he going to start inject some speed into this horse if he's going to turn him back to the Cigar Mile? Too early to give up on this horse. Again, a horse that was probably a little bit overrated.
Closing day at Keeneland, the main event is the Fayette, and it goes to the player Buff Bradley, Calvin Burrell. They win with a 97 buyer.